Well, as long as we have nuclear weapons, many of them, far too many of them, minutes from use, then use of these weapons deliberately, by miscalculation or by accident is always possible. So I'm not a technical expert, I'm a politician, but I listen to people who have been engaged in these issues all of their lives. You know, Bill Perry, who was President Clinton's defense minister, is outspoken on this in this regard, and he speaks for lots of people I know who say that we are nearer the use of a nuclear weapon now than we have been, he says, from the Cuban Missile Crisis, but it doesn't really matter precisely from when, but certainly since the end of the Cold War. And I mean, that's a failure of political leadership, that we emerged from the Cold War. For 70 years we've avoided the use, sometimes by luck, and there are very many serious people who think that the use of one of these weapons in some circumstances, probably more likely by inadvertence, is more likely to happen now than it has been for a long period of time. So we need to galvanize our leaders to do a series of things that are in our joint interests, to avoid that at all costs, because the consequences would be horrific. Okay, so I think there are lots of explanations for that. One of them is that most of the people who live in a part of the world that has most of the nuclear weapons, which is the part that you and I live in, that's what is called the Euro-Atlantic space, most of those people rightly thought that at the end of the Cold War, we would put these weapons in the past, that there would be no reason for us to continue to threaten each other with them in order to keep the peace. And it's even more inexplicable to people because we mix more freely with each other now than we did during the Cold War. You know, I work with, meet with, see on the streets of the city that I live in and the city I work in, Russians and people from what were Warsaw Pact countries. We have lots of relationships. I watch their major sports stars play in teams that I watch playing different sports. So this is inexplicable to people that we are still at war. I mean, I live and work in a city, or at least I did live in it. I don't live in London any longer, but in which football teams and newspapers were owned by Russians. So why do we have these fears? Why are our governments not capable, of getting beyond the sorts of attitudes that we had in the last century when things were completely different? So I think most people think that people like me exaggerate these concerns, but these weapons generate the concerns because they are minutes from use at any given time. Now they are minutes from use and people could make bad choices. Secondly, people don't know how they can affect this. They know they can change the way in which they live and make their own contribution to climate change. They can leave the car in the garage. They can take public transport. They can stop using plastic bags. They can buy an electric car. They can turn the heating down or off. They can do lots of things. They can even stop eating meat if, ruminating animals are causing this. But they feel there's nothing they can do. This is a matter for political leadership. And they're right. It is a matter for leadership. And we've had in the past leadership who understood this. We had Mikhail Gorbachev, Ronald Reagan, who famously both agreed about this. We had leaders who were willing to say that a nuclear war cannot be won and therefore should not be fought. Now we have leaders who are competing with each other to brag about how quickly they will use nuclear weapons. This is very worrying for people who understand what these weapons can do. But I understand why people feel powerful. So we have to find some sort of way of getting people to factor this back into their political decisions so that the vast majority of us who would likely see the world with none of these weapons get represented by politicians who agree with us and represent us. Well, we first of all, I think, have to persuade our leaders to repeat if not publicly, at least in their minds, the phrase that a nuclear war cannot be won, and consequently must never be fought. So what is the point in fighting a war that you cannot win? So that would be good. We need leaders who understand the scale and nature of this threat and who see our common interests in avoiding it. So we need military-to-military conversations that we had during the whole of the Cold War to avoid confrontations escalating between nuclear armed states. We should do less. We need people to understand what the rules are. The rules are in all of our interests. I mean, we may not agree with all of them internationally, but we should agree with the ones that are in our interests, at least as a starting point. And we need to find what are called in the business of arms control confidence-building measures. So, I never have I work a lot with Russian people, with people across the whole of the Euro-Atlantic. I find common cause with them very easily. So, it's not a people-to-people thing, it's politics. And the politics needs to reflect our ability to be able to engage with each other. I have many Russian friends, many of whom were senior people during the Cold War in the Soviet Union, or in some aspect of that. But I have common positions with them. So, for example, I am terrified of cyber threat to the command and control of nuclear weapons. We should agree never to do that. It's not in anybody's interests to do that, because these weapons are so, I keep repeating this, but they are so awesome in their effect. The effect of the use of one of these will change the way we all live forever. Well, I think what we're doing is we're getting into a kind of arms race. And I say that because repeatedly I read words that people have used which remind me of that, and some of them constantly use the phraseology of winning a race. If it's about artificial intelligence, if it's about lethal autonomous weapons, if it's about weapon systems, if it's about space and the weaponization of space, everybody has this kind of idea that somehow there is a race to be run and a race to be won. The truth of the matter, of course, is that we're in the beginning of a phase of technological advancement which we human beings don't control, because we are building machinery that learns for itself and makes decisions for itself and judgments for itself. So we have to, I think, get out of the idea that we will determine where this starts, where the starting block is, and where the finishing tape is. We will not. So it just seems to me that this is very mistaken conversation in any event because of where the technology is, but it's very dangerous. Because people say things like, whoever wins this race will, and then it's either control the world or dictate the future or whatever. But that's not true. The technology will decide where we are, and I have no reason to believe that I can see the end of the development of the technology, and I don't think anybody else has. So I'm worried about that. And you get into that phase, it only leads us to the situation we got into in the Cold War. And we'd moved from that. And people in their own minds have moved from that. Social media allows people to communicate across the world, but so does normal travel. Holiday makers, I walk in the streets of the cities. I keep making this point. I walk in the streets of the cities that I work in. When I was in DC, when I was in London, now when I'm in Cambridge, I hear Russian spoken. I hear languages spoken from countries who were in the Warsaw Pact. When I was young, in the Cold War, these people would have been diplomats or spies, or in some cases both. But now they're ordinary people. I meet people in restaurants and shops, diners, staff, experts. I watch artists and sports people who are Russian. This is a different world. The New START Treaty, as we refer to it, or START 3 as other people refer to it, but in the West we call it New START, has this extension proposition, right? So I am in favour of it being extended because it allows a degree of verification and inspection that we've never had before. And if we want to be safe, we need to be very transparent, and we have been in that sense in terms of strategic weapons. That is the United States and Russia, a level of transparency we've never had before, and it is very reassuring because people can be honest. And recently, you know, the Russian offer was made to come and inspect a new weapons system, which they clearly think comes within the province of that treaty. So that's a good thing, and we should take advantage of that. So it allows us to do that, but much more importantly, it allows us a space where we have arms control to start thinking about what the next generation of arms control should look like and start discussing and negotiating it. Of course, if people want to invite China to join, they should of course do that, but that will be very problematic. But at least the two countries who own the vast majority of these weapons should find some way of coexisting in safety with those weapons in their numbers and in the postures we have for them. And they will not do that unless we have an ongoing discussion about arms control. That is, how do we coexist with these and have stability in our relationships so that people are not just constantly living in fear of war breaking out. So of course we should. I mean, we may end up very soon in a situation where we have no arms control for strategic weapons, specifically for strategic weapons, or for that matter, really any weapons, because we've lost a lot of it, and we've nothing in the pipeline. So, I mean, if these people think that we can live safely with these weapon systems and technical developments doing that, they need to explain to us how that can be, or else we need to talk to each other. This is a very difficult question to answer unless you have access to the levels of intelligence that governments have, and I had at one time but no longer have. On balance, and this is a judgment rather than, I would fear that terrorists could get to the point of being able to do that, but at the moment, I could be reassured that they don't by people who know, and people do reassure me. But my worry about terrorists is not that they build or detonate a nuclear bomb, although that would be horrifying. My worry is that they can interfere with our command and control through gateways into our systems, which are reliant on the internet, and can prevent us, this may sound difficult, this is difficult to explain to people, but prevent us from being confident that we could use a weapon when we wanted to. Now, the importance for that is that nuclear deterrence, if it works at all, only works if the people whom you are deterring from using a weapon believe that you can still use your weapon. But if they can get themselves to the point through agency of terrorism, or if terrorists get to the point where they undermine your ability to control your weapons, then it makes that balance impossible. So that's my real worry. I'm also very worried that terrorists get their hands on materials which can go into all weapons of mass destruction. Because even if they can't explode them or disperse them to effect, the very fact they have them and can threaten to do so will be terrorizing. So, I mean, if I explain to you that somebody in the city you live in was holed up with a radioactive weapon, that without you having the technical knowledge of knowing what that radioactive material was and all the rest of it, you couldn't be sure about what it would do, but you would just know it was a bad thing. And it could be an extremely bad thing, and you would be terrorized. It would affect substantially how we live our lives, the freedoms we allow people, the freedoms we allow ourselves, and potentially change, very significantly the way we live forever. I still support the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran deal. I am horrified that the United States, for the reasons that they did, came out of that, because all of the verification methods, all of the reporting from the independent organizations who were doing it said that the Iranians were respecting the deal. So, I'm pleased that the European Union, my own country, continue to support the deal. I'm pleased that both Russia and China continue to support the deal. I now see happening what I feared would happen, which was the Iranians are saying if the deal doesn't deliver for us, why should we observe it? And they are pushing the limits of that and may have gone beyond them. And happy to announce it. And if it completely disintegrates, then we will be back in the situation very quickly that we were in before, which is that Iran was on the verge of having a nuclear weapon. And if it gets a nuclear weapon, well, who's to know what will happen in the Middle East? But we know what people are threatening. So people are saying if Iran gets a weapon, we will need to have one. Now, that's a complicated process, and one cannot be certain that that's what will necessarily happen, but it won't make the most troubling part of the world any better. It will make it much more difficult. So the sooner we can get back to some sort of deal, and it has to involve the United States of America with the Iranians, but that's going to be extraordinarily difficult. Why would you trust them again? The better if we can do that, but this is a very difficult situation. But those of us who still believe this was the right deal, and what other deal is there? But those of us who believe this is the right deal, and if we are to get Korea to the same place, it has to be a similar type of deal that is done with them, then we have to continue to support that and work the best we can to support it, but it looks very difficult. I mean, people always ask me if there's a possibility of, or if there's a chance. Of course there is. If you have leaders who are willing to do this, then things can be done. But I'm not an expert on China, but the people who are experts on China say that it is going to be very difficult to get China to engage with such a proposition. Surprisingly to me, the President of the United States says that this must be possible, and that he, I think, repeated these words over the last few days when he's been in London for the NATO meeting, but he was very confident that he would get a deal with North Korea, and that looks very problematic. So I'm not confident about this also. I mean, the fundamental problem here is that people don't trust each other any longer. So we're all very familiar with the narratives. This was your fault because you did this, and then you say this was your fault because you did this. But we need to get back into the space of common interest, and we need people who lead our respective countries who understand this common interest. And if we get those people, then perhaps we can rebuild the trust that the last 10 years has lost us, and get back to some idea of control of weapon systems that are so dangerous and would lead us inevitably to a 21st century war with technology that is horrifying. So I'm not confident, I'm afraid, but I will continue to work for it. I've spent the last 10 years of my life working with people across the whole world spectrum who believe on trying to rid the world of these weapons. I'm not going to give up now. But I am less optimistic now than I was, but I am still hopeful. It's not a good development. Space is broadly an unregulated environment. It is a common environment. None of us, none of us can claim to own it, because we all depend on it. And we have broadly had respect for it and not weaponized it. But now we're in a phase where countries, including Russia, India, other countries are developing anti-satellite weaponry. And the United States is, wherever it is in this thinking about Space Force. And my understanding is that even my own government, in a sense, or at least people who aspire to be in government, believe that we should develop some form of Space Force. I am I'm wholeheartedly opposed to it. This is a space in which we all depend. And we should keep it neutral. And if we start to deploy forces or capabilities in there that are for war fighting of one description or another, then it reduces all of our collective security. And if you reduce our collective security in a world where people have nuclear weapons and are not fully perhaps in control of them, then it increases the possibility of use, does it not? It just seems to me sensibly, one thing to follow another, that you put another, uncontrollable and sort of difficult factor into this that nobody has full control over. So that's likely, in my view, not to lead to more stability, but less. But of course, these people think that if they get there first, then that makes them safer, but nobody's ever first. They're just there minutes before anybody else in modern technology. And they will be overtaken very quickly by people. And sometimes by people who have no allegiance to any country, because modern technology is much cheaper and much more accessible. It's just a very worrying environment altogether.